Grace Bennett was 20 years old, and she owned nothing but a duffel bag, a cracked phone with no service, and a blanket that smelled like the bus station floor she'd slept on the night before. 2 years earlier, she'd had a normal life in a small town outside Springfield, Ohio. A mom who worked double shifts at the diner. A dad who left before she could remember his face. Then her mother died of a sudden heart attack, and within 6 months, Grace lost the apartment, dropped out of community college, and found herself standing on a sidewalk with everything she owned in one bag. She learned the hard geography of being invisible, which churches served breakfast on which mornings, which gas station bathrooms wouldn't chase her out, which bench in Lincoln Park was safest at night. She learned to sleep sitting up with her bag looped through her arm, to flinch awake at every set of footsteps, to make a granola bar last 2 meals. She used to whisper to herself at night, "This isn't the end of my story. It can't be." One grey October morning, Grace was digging through a recycling bin behind the library, hoping for a bottle worth a nickel, when a torn county notice caught her eye. It had blown loose from a bulletin board. County surplus auction, decommissioned water tower and 4.5 acres, outside town limits. Sold as is. No guarantee. Opening bid, $5. Grace read it 3 times. A water tower. Rusted, collapsed on one side, sitting on land nobody wanted. But it was still walls. Still a roof, of sorts. Still something the wind couldn't take from her. She had exactly $9 folded in her sock. It was enough. The auction was held in the parking lot of the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning, folding chairs set up under a grey sky. Grace stood at the back in a coat 2 sizes too big, watching contractors and land speculators bid on real properties, a strip mall, 2 farmhouses, a stretch of riverfront. When the auctioneer finally called the water tower lot, laughter rippled through the small crowd. "That thing's been condemned since 2011, someone muttered. Nobody raised a paddle. $5, going once. Grace's hand shot up before she could stop herself. $5, she said, her voice cracking. The auctioneer blinked, looked at her second-hand coat, and shrugged. Sold. To the young lady in the back. A few people snickered. Grace didn't care. She walked out of that parking lot as the legal owner of 4.5 acres and a broken tower, the first thing she had owned, free and clear, in her entire life. Inside the base, she found a maintenance hatch, half buried in leaves and collapsed brush. It led to a narrow underground utility room that had once housed the pump system, dry, sheltered, and, most importantly, out of the wind. That night, Grace slept indoors for the first time in 14 months. She cried herself to sleep, but for the first time in a long while, it wasn't only from grief. The next morning, she started clearing the room to make it livable. Sweeping loose gravel aside with a broken plank, her foot caught on something solid beneath the dirt, a corner of rusted metal, flush with the concrete floor. She knelt down, heart hammering, and began digging with her bare hands. 10 minutes later, she'd uncovered a steel trapdoor, bolted shut, with a padlock so corroded it crumbled when she struck it with a rock. Underneath was a shaft with a rusted ladder leading down into blackness. Grace hesitated. Every instinct told her this was either the smartest or the most dangerous thing she'd ever do. She turned on her phone's flashlight, 5% battery, and climbed down anyway. She pried it open with a piece of rebar. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of pre-1965 silver coins, a small velvet pouch of gold rings, and a waterproof folder holding brittle, yellow documents. Grace's hand shook so badly she could barely unfold them. The papers were old land deeds and letters, dated back to the 1960s, belonging to a man named Harold Ashworth, the original farmer who had owned this land before it was seized by the county for the water system and never fully resolved in the records. Buried with the coins was a short, handwritten note, the ink faded almost to nothing. For whoever finds this when the tower finally falls. I never trusted banks. I trusted the ground. H.A. Grace sat there in the dim glow of her dying phone, holding that note like it was a message written directly to her. She thought about how strange it was. A man she'd never met, dead for who knew how many years, had left something behind for a stranger he could never have imagined. A homeless 20-year-old with $9 and nowhere left to fall. She sat in that dark little room and laughed and cried at the same time, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. The next morning, Grace walked 11 miles into town and into the office of a legal aid clinic, her clothes still dusty from the tower. The attorney who saw her almost turned her away, until she opened the folder. What followed was months of work, A coin appraiser confirming the silver and gold were genuine and worth well over $100,000 combined, a title search proving Harold Ashworth had died with no surviving heirs, and a county judge ultimately ruling that both the coins and the unresolved acreage legally belonged to Grace, the verified purchaser of record. The girl who once counted nickels behind a library now had a bank account with 6 figures in it, and clear legal title to land the county itself had forgotten it's still half-owned. She sat in her car outside the bank the day the funds cleared and didn't move for 20 minutes, just staring at the number on the screen like it might disappear if she blinked. The night the ruling came through, Grace didn't celebrate at a restaurant or buy anything extravagant. She drove out to the tower, climbed inside one last time, and sat in the dark chamber where she'd found the box. She thought about every diner manager who'd let her sit an extra hour without ordering, and every one who'd kicked her out. Every stranger who'd tossed $1 without meeting her eyes, and the one man who'd once knelt down to actually ask her name. She thought about the version of herself that had almost stopped believing there was a future worth walking toward. "I'm not going to forget this," she said out loud, to no one. Not the tower. Not the bench. Not any of it. Grace didn't tear the tower down. She had it structurally reinforced and restored, keeping the dented tank and rusted ladder exactly as they were, a monument, not an eyesore. On the acreage around it, she built something else entirely, a 16-bed transitional shelter for homeless young adults aging out of foster care, the population she knew best because she had been one of them. She named it the Ashworth House, after the man whose buried trust had changed her life, and hung a small plaque at the base of the tower. Everyone walks past something they think is worthless. Look closer. She gave one interview to the local paper, and one line from it got quoted everywhere. People decide what you're worth by looking at the outside. This tower taught me that the outside is never the whole story, not for a building, and not for a person. Local business owners who had once shooed her away from their storefronts started donating supplies to the shelter without ever realizing the woman running it was the same girl they'd once told to move along. Today, Grace runs the Ashworth House full-time. She still walks the property every morning, past the tower that started it all, now painted, lit at night, safe. Kids who arrive at her shelter, scared, carrying garbage bags instead of suitcases, often ask her the same question: how did she survive it? She always gives them the same answer. Not the coins. Not the money. I survived because I refused to believe the bench was the end of my story. Everything else was just what happened after I kept going. And every single night, before the lights go out at the Ashworth House, Grace checks that every bed is filled, every door is locked, and the tower outside is still standing, proof, lit up against the dark, that nothing broken stays broken forever, and that sometimes the thing everyone else calls worthless is the exact place a whole new life is waiting to begin. The end.